We'll jump into today's episode right after this announcement. For over 13 years, something remarkable has been happening. Rural hospitals and other small healthcare organizations that have partnered with Capstone have been achieving results and forming workplace cultures that even we are blown away by. It is truly a game changer when rural hospitals are the provider of choice and employer of choice so they can keep care local and margins strong. Far more healthcare organizations need to experience what's possible. That's why we're stepping forward in a bigger way, expanding our team of experts, expanding our capabilities by adding a strategic planning division to expand our ability to help even more rural hospitals and other healthcare organizations in 2026 and beyond. Capstone will continue to be the partner that small healthcare organizations can count on to meet them where they're at and guide them towards a stronger future. You can learn more at capstoneleadership.net.
When my administration brought to me that they wanted me to lead the service excellence team, it felt like extra work at first. But I have been able to meet employees in departments that aren't mine and that don't necessarily work with mine and have these really transparent, honest conversations about how they impact our patients. That has been, I think, the best part of my nursing journey so far.
Welcome to Culture Change RX, the podcast for healthcare professionals that are committed to creating a thriving workplace culture, improving the experiences of employees and patients, and ultimately unlocking their organization's next level of potential. I'm Sue Tetzlaff, your host and co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions. Join me and my insightful guests each week as we share actionable insights for navigating the crucial people side of the business of healthcare. Subscribe now for a weekly dose of Culture Change RX. Now let's dive into this week's conversation where culture change takes center stage. Welcome to another episode of Culture Change RX. It is me, Sue Tetzlaff, co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions and host of Culture Change RX. And today is one of those episodes where I have the delight of having someone in the studio. And so it's not just me here all alone with you, it is Chelsea. And we are going to be talking today about patient experience improvements. And we're going to start by having Chelsea introduce herself, tell us a little bit more about who she is and where she's working. And then we're going to get into our conversation today. Welcome, Chelsea.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be on the podcast with you. Thank you for the introduction. I am Chelsea Hoffrichter. I'm a registered nurse. I work at MyMichigan-Sault. I currently am the nursing manager of infusion therapy and the hematology oncology physician practice, but I call it my night gig. I'm also the service excellence leader. So I lead a team of employees for MyMichigan-Sault. Our main goal is to improve the patient experience, and it's probably my favorite role so far.
That's so funny that you would say that, Chelsea, about it being kind of your night job and maybe other duties as assigned, but it's one of your favorites. I hear that from employees that are on these teams, that it becomes some of the favorite work they get to do for their organizations. So since you mentioned this team that you're leading for service excellence at MyMichigan-Sault, can you tell a little bit about the history of how you got involved with this team and leading this team and taking on this extra responsibility beyond your nurse management duties?
Yeah. So when I became a leader, which was about 6 years ago now, my VP of nursing came to me and said, hey, we have this leader-driven team called Service Excellence, and we look at survey scores and we talk about what we're hearing in the community and really work on what kind of excellent experience our patients are having in the hallway, when they visit their families, when they have surgeries, all the above. There was a time about 3 years ago when we were struggling with some of our patient experience scores. So we asked for some help from our friends at Capstone and said, hey, what's something we can do differently here? So this is where the employee-driven team idea came alive. So my senior admin team looked at the employees that were sitting on the team, looked at all the leaders, and asked me to stay on the team as the one and only leader. and help choose employees that were a really great fit to sit and really drive those initiatives forward, which was challenging, I'll tell you. It was really challenging because, there's got to be a certain employee that sits on that team, personality, professionally, like a lot goes into who sits on that team. But yeah, that's how I stepped into the role as being the only leader on the team. And I have really enjoyed that, getting to know those employees. I call them my own, even though I joke with them that I don't get to, put anything on their annual review and I don't get to sign their paychecks. But, I treat them the same as my own employees. I round on them. I make sure they're happy in their roles, and they really have grown. And that's the most exciting part to me. So that's kind of the history. We changed about 3 years ago from a leader-driven team to employee-driven. So far, that has really worked for us.
I love that. And I love that you mentioned that selecting these employees is a really important part of getting this right. And I'm just wondering about the makeup of the employees. Is it all clinical people? Is it a mix of clinical and non-clinical? Like, what's the diversity there as far as representation across the organization?
Yeah, so that actually was a huge part, was trying to figure out what is our skill mix, what really makes a difference with the patients, how do we get everyone's voice involved. So that has been a little bit of trial and error. I think it took about a year before I finally got the group where everyone was dedicated. Most importantly, their leaders were able to say, yes, this is something that I want to be a part of, because them leaving their departments to come to meetings, or if we're out, doing a big initiative that takes up 3-4 hours, I need to be able to, be sure that they can leave their departments. So to answer your question, I have a little of both. I have 10 total on the team, including myself. And I have, I think, 4 non-clinical and maybe 5 clinical, and then myself. So I have 1 employee that started out on afternoons and 1 employee on night shift. They've since changed their shift, being on the team for 3 years. But I think it's important that you have both, all shifts covered if you can. However, that is very challenging for your meeting times. I will say that we've hit some challenges with, when can we meet? We don't want our night shifters, working all night and then coming to a meeting, and having to stay up extra hours. Or, your nursing staff works 3 12-hour shifts, and your non-clinical typically work 5 8-hour shifts. So we really kind of had to work through some of that. I worked with their leaders to say, listen, it's really important that they attend our meetings, because I only get them for 2 hours a month, So, and we, for some reason, the mix of employees I have right now, they have these big, beautiful ideas, which is really amazing. And a lot of their ideas have come to life. That's probably my favorite part about the team. But it does take time to kind of whittle down what's realistic for the organization, whether it's finances or time and energy spent on the initiatives. So to answer your question, I do have a bit of a skill mix. I have clinical and non-clinical, and both of them serve that team so well. You really need both sides of a coin to make good decisions for all 1,000 employees, because that's a big job when you're making decisions for everyone, So
Absolutely.
I really need both of their perspectives.
Yeah. And what I heard you also say is how creative they are and how they come up with these amazing ideas. And I think that I know that when we are coaching from Capstone leaders of employee-driven teams, a lot of the leaders are afraid to take on those roles because they think they have to come up with all the ideas. They need to make all the decisions. They have to leave with a big to-do list, and that the employees are acting mainly as advisors or, something like that, or a sounding board, where really it's sounding like to me that you've got it going like we would recommend, that the employees are really the idea generators. They make the decision of what ideas to go with, and then they do the work to make it happen.
Yes. And I can give you a great example of that too. We're always looking at our survey results, and that's really more of my job, is to make sure I understand the metrics. And that has been a really interesting part of my job and served my own department well, I think, because I understand how that survey works. That's a whole nother conversation. But we had some scores that were a little low for our patients understanding who their provider was. We have a hospitalist program, And so sometimes the patients experience our changeover for hospitalists, or we have some APPs that work at night that will cover them and round on the patients. So my team said, gosh, is it because our doctors all dress a little differently? Classically, doctors are wearing a white coat and they have a stethoscope. And now when you see doctors, they're wearing these really cute scrubs and they do have their names somewhere, but, they get blended in with respiratory and nursing and everybody. So their idea was, and it's simple, but it has worked so well. They just printed these 8x10 pictures of who the doctors are. And we have our logo on it. It says MyMichigan-Sault, and it has their name. And that goes right on their whiteboard. And so during bedside shift report, if it's changeover day for the hospitalist, the nurses will switch out whoever the new hospitalist is coming on. And they'll say, hey, Mrs. Smith, you have, so-and-so today taking care of you. And that has driven our physician scores way up, way up. It was like the patients knew they were getting great care, but they just didn't recognize the human that was, hey, this is the doctor that discharged me. So really simple, low cost, easy workflow to put in place on the inpatient floors, and has really driven that data the right way. And that is totally my team. The only thing I do is rein them in a little, because they, like I said, they have these big, beautiful ideas. So, I always joke with them, like, my job is just to love you and hug you and kind of bring you back this way, because, they would like to take on the world, but we just don't have time to do that. I love their enthusiasm, and I never want to, cloud it, but we do have to, keep it manageable. But yeah, like that's just a great idea of employees that work on the floor that noticed a gap in care, and it's simple communication. They came up with the change, and now we see the patient survey data is going in the right direction. I mean, that's just a great example of employees really doing the work.
Yeah. I just, hats off to them. I've always just marveled at their creativity and their ability to see the solution in a way that maybe somehow we just didn't notice the solution before as leaders. So they're closer to it. They look at it differently a lot. So yeah, I know that when we're in a small organization, having those employees for 2 hours a month or for an initiative event or something going on that might be a few hours a quarter or something, is that sometimes it's hard to release them from their department and their job duties there when there's not a big bench of people to fill in the void in their department and the work that needs to be done. And so that can be a real challenge. How is your team dealing with that, Chelsea? Because I assume it's a challenge.
Yes, it is a challenge. So there's a couple of points I'll make with that. And these are things I had to learn as I, got a little further into my years leading the team. So I don't know if it's because just I have a really fun mix of people on my team, but I get a lot of leaders that will come to me and say, hey, I would like an employee on the team. I have a good candidate. Will you put them on the team? So 2 schools of thought with that. I think 10 is kind of a sweet spot, and almost maybe too many sometimes. I don't want the team to be giant, because that's more work for me to manage their schedules and their leaders, and maybe too many ideas when I only have an hour worth of time for them, twice a month. So I like to keep that in mind. Number 2, I don't recruit the employee to service excellence until I first tell their leader, this is what I expect out of the employee being on my team. So if they're going to be on the team, 2 things. They have to come to every meeting. And if they can't, they're going to let me know, and they will have homework, because we want to be successful. And it takes a lot of time and energy for us to come up with the content for initiatives, how we're going to roll it out, our education materials, and then study, adjust, and validation. I mean, that's a lot of work for 10 of us to do. It's important work, but it's a lot of work. So before I would ever ask an employee to be on the team, I make sure with the leader, can you send them? Our meetings are at noon and 4 p.m. I have them booked for the entire year. And if they say, yep, I think I can send them, I can cover them, or, whatever the case is, then I include the leader on the calendar invite so that my employees are accountable to their leader to say, hey, I've got a meeting today. Can I get covered? But also the leader knows ahead of time, in case the leader is the one that's covering them, to say, oh, okay, I can see there's a service excellence meeting at noon on Thursday. I'm going to block my calendar so I can cover it. So really, really thorough, clear expectations with the leader before I place an employee on the team. that has really helped with some of that smaller department coverage. And sometimes the leader says to me, I can't spare somebody right now. And that's okay. There are some really key departments that I always want to have somebody in. ED is one of them, radiology, lab, like those big players that see a lot of our patients in our community. You want their voices on that team, but they're often the hardest departments to get released for meetings. So just having a really strong relationship with their leader and open communication has really served me well as far as success to coming to meetings. The second thing is when I talk to the employee, the invite is a face-to-face conversation with me because sometimes I don't know the employees and I haven't met them before. And I say to them, like, you were recommended by your leader, and I give all the positive reasons that they should be on the team. But then I give clear expectations at that point, right? Meetings twice a month. Sometimes you have extra, homework to do during your downtime at work. Sometimes we have to talk in front of people. But the main thing I want them to know is that they're a change agent, right? I want to make sure that my employees that are on the service excellence team really can speak to our initiatives and they live them every day. I want them to walk in the hallway and feel confident to, tell somebody, hey, we don't talk on our cell phones in the hallway. We say hi to our customers. And that can be hard, Sue. Sometimes that's hard to find the right personality that is okay to, do that. So that's another part of the job that I love is coaching employees to feel confident that these are the things we should be doing for our community members. The choice of employee on the team, super important. Covering them, I would say, is definitely a challenge, but I just try to keep the communication open with the leader. And then I choose meeting times that work well for departments. Noon is usually lunch. And then 4 p.m., I can try to catch my 5-day-a-weekers when they're done with their shift. We did have a little bit later meeting when I had a night shifter. I had it at 5 so they could come before their shift. So it just depends on the mix of employees you have on your team. But really having open, honest, clear communication with their leader is important. And my selling point is that they can use their service excellence employee at their staff meetings to talk about patient experience. Use them as a huge catalyst in your department. That's a plus. It may seem like a burden to the leader to have to cover them, but they don't know they got a gem sitting in their department. So I try to make sure and remind them of that. Use them. I spend a lot of time teaching them about all these great initiatives. They're well educated and they should be able to talk to their peers about how to put those initiatives in action and make them alive in their department. So it's really a great selling point. But those are some tips I've used that I found to be successful over the last 3 years.
Pausing here to get healthcare executives excited about Capstone's 14th annual Healthcare Executive Forum. Many small and rural healthcare organizations are operating under conditions that naturally strain margins, workforce stability, and long-term competitiveness. Strength today requires more than perseverance. It requires intentional design and doing. And that's why the focus of our Healthcare Executive Forum this year is on designing the future. It's all about where strategic clarity meets execution certainty. This isn't just another conference or networking event. This is where rural healthcare executives learn how to lead their organizations to true organizational vitality. If your plan or your ability to execute it is in question, if progress feels incremental instead of transformational, it may be time for a trajectory-changing strategic period. Be a leader in rural healthcare's new era, the era of organizational vitality. Register now and bring your executive team. It is true that the next 3 years may be the most defining period your organization has faced in decades. Visit capstoneleadership.net and click on upcoming events. See you in June in Madison.
Right. I know that that's a topic of conversation and challenge in other teams too and organizations. So I know there's going to be some people out there that are going to be so glad that you shared your approach to that. And, it's a challenge, but it sounds like you've got some good working tactics to meet up with that challenge. You mentioned another thing about your role and the data. And one of the things that when we're working with a team and helping them set up their action plans is that they become more data savvy over time. They don't all have to become data experts, but it isn't all about the data, but data really helps us know what to work on and if what we're working on is working. So tell me what's going on with your team and maybe even with leaders or overall in the organization about how data and survey information from patient is used, or some of the things that you consider when you're using survey data with your team or as a group of leaders there.
Gosh, there's a lot to cover with that topic. I'll tell you what works well for me. I try to focus on our inpatient scores. So I focus on HCAHPS. Now, I'm going to preface that statement by saying whenever I teach an initiative, so I'll just use High in the Hallway as an example, I make sure to tell leaders that every employee, no matter if they're inpatient, outpatient, facilities, dietary, housekeeping, everybody plays a role in the patient experience. And I actually did like a little series with some of my more common leaders that would come to me and say, well, I don't have a survey question, so I'm not really sure what you want me to do with the information you gave. I try to tie it back to how I do actually feel like they don't exactly have a survey question, but they do certainly influence, our patient's experience. I'll give an example. Our facilities leader, if it's cold in the room, you better believe I'm going to hear about that on survey. So heating and cooling on an inpatient unit is a huge factor for satisfaction. And your maintenance men are the people that run that little, dial on the wall. So yes, even though it doesn't say how was your facility's, experience, they certainly do influence that survey. So as far as data goes, my team watches our HCAHPS scores very closely. So I said before, I have 2 meetings a month. At one meeting, I spend about 15 minutes going over our data, and it's always at the beginning of the month so that I can review the previous month's data. We don't scour the survey, but if I see some comments that are amazing that we should recognize people for, we do that. Or if we see a trend in something, like we saw the physician questions, where we could not change the dial on those physician questions. So we focused on what are our patients telling us? Do they know who their physician is? And I could give 1,000 examples of just survey, questions that we sort of dialed in on. Nursing is usually what we are looking at, but we just did some work on the physicians as well. So yes, my team is aware of the metrics. They can speak to what our goals are year to year. But other than that, I try really hard not to survey surf, Sue. I call it survey surfing because I swear our numbers are like waves in an ocean. We're going to go up and down, and what we're looking for is just a trend upwards. That's what I tell leaders. Just watch your trend. Don't make any big plan of actions, based on a 1 or 2 bad months. And by bad, I just mean downward trends, because that's going to happen. And we don't know why sometimes. Stay the course, make sure that your teams are up to date, but don't make any giant action plans based on 1 or 2 bad surveys. Another thing I try to talk to leaders about is, although leaders have to know the ins and outs of the metrics, when you tie back patient experience to your teams, it's more engaging them in why they became healthcare workers in the first place. And I read a Capstone article in my email about that, and it really hit home for me, because I see leaders being frustrated that they cannot get those survey scores up where they're supposed to be. And if you don't engage your staff in why they became healthcare employees and why it matters to them that their patients have a great experience, then that is going to be really difficult to move that dial. But that takes time, right? Changing your culture takes so much time. We just have to be patient, and that can be difficult when you're a leader and you have pressure to get those scores up. So that can be challenging. And I don't know that I have that all figured out, but that's what I tell my team is try to remember why we got into healthcare in the first place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I did recently have another organization that Capstone is partnered with for their transformational journey, and patient experience is one of those. And that's exactly what the CEO had shared with me, is that people aren't really interested, staff aren't really interested in necessarily moving those numbers on the survey, but they are interested in their community members getting great care and service. And there's a lot of great stories and not just numbers that reflect how we're doing with that. So it's nice to, I'm an and person, focus on both the numbers and the stories and the experiences and the, yeah. So, and I guess the heart part of it, not just the head part of it. So
That's
your
right.
team is obviously so important to your organization's strategic priority to have a great patient experience. But leaders also have a role in their individual departments in leading how service is going, specifically where they are, and using a lot of the great tactics your team is bringing out and grabbing the baton for them to use them in whatever their department does to serve patients. Tell me then, beyond your team, what kind of things are going on with your leaders in the organization that are supporting them maybe in that role to support this initiative and also support maybe the work of your team?
Yeah, so I'll tell you I have a very structured brain and I need timelines in order to be successful. So when I first became a leader of the service excellence team, I was like, what? I don't know where to start. I know what works in my department and I know what worked when I was an inpatient nurse, but I'm not sure how to bring any of these alive with leaders. So I actually surveyed the leadership team because everyone's a different learner, right? And I'm not sure how they want to deliver the information back to their teams. All the teams are different sizes. They have different shifts. I don't know how their staff meetings are set up, all the things. So I surveyed them and I said, how do you want me to give you the education? So we have a monthly leadership meeting, which most organizations do. I have a standing agenda item, and that is thanks to the support of my senior leadership team. And I should have said that at the beginning of this podcast. I would never be successful on this team without them. Because I have had their backing the entire time. They're very supportive. So I have a standing agenda item and I ask the leaders, do you want me to present it in a PowerPoint? Do you want a handout? Do you want a video? What works best for your teams? And then I kept that. And when I have a big initiative, like right now we're talking about managing up. And this is something we hardwired 2 years ago, but we noticed our teamwork scores we're having a downward trend here. So we taught people what managing up is, what language and care transitions we should be using. But to re-hardwire it, we thought, why don't we let other departments, so let's let MedSurg, OB, ICU, decide how they want other departments to talk about them. So I went to the leadership team and I said, hey, I want you to choose how you want to show up in the world. So I want you to make a short video that talks about all the great people you have on your team. And so I'll give an example. If a registration receptionist checks in a patient that's going to have a stress test, what can registration say about cardiology that puts you guys in a positive light and sort of eases the patient's stress about having a stress test? So we're getting these cool managing up videos from all the departments, and they really get to choose, right? We have a certified echo tech or, whatever they're proud of in their department. And I'm sending those out to all employees so that we have something to say about each other. And that has really, really actually been very positive. I love the videos. They're very interesting. But that's a good example of the leaders maybe feeling like, oh, Chelsea's putting one more thing on me. I got to make a video and I got to get my staff engaged. And now I got to record it and I got to send it. And, my intention is not to create work, because that's not a good look when you're trying to have peer relationships that are strong and positive. I certainly don't want to add work to my peers, but I do want to see our teamwork scores going up in the survey and our teams, our departments working well together. So they might be, but our patients don't know that. So we have to add that managing up line and care transitions. And I wanted them to choose how they show up in the world. And really the idea is, how do they sell it to their teams? Like you said, how do they take those initiatives and make them alive in their departments? And I asked them, do you want the video content? Do you want a handout? What works best for you? And I kept that information from the survey, and that's how I deliver it to them. I'll tell you that content is a lot of what the service excellence team does, and it takes a lot of time. So when I put out a new initiative, I give myself 2 full months for content. So that's 4 meetings that the team and I work on what content we're going to do. If it's going to be a handout, we work on what's on the handout, what's the layout. Do we want 1 page or 2 page? All of those things. How are we going to be successful? And then we spend 1 month rolling it out. So I teach a leadership team. I ask the leaders to take the baton and teach their teams over a month period of time. And then we move on to the next initiative. But that following quarter, when we're doing content creation for the next initiative, we continue to validate with the leaders that what we taught them is actually in place and working with patients. So if you put out a managing up video, I want to know that leaders, when they round on their employees, are saying, hey, are you using managing up between care transitions? That validation piece, I would say, is the most challenging, Sue.
And the most missed.
I know how,
Chelsea, and most. It's the most missed.
Yeah. Yes, it's very hard. I have secret shoppers that help me with the validation piece, but leading that service excellence team doesn't give me a lot of time to do the validation in all departments. Mm-hmm. So that's really up to the leaders as well. And so when I do interdepartmental rounding, I take that time to ask my fellow leaders about validating whatever initiative we have out. But other than that, I would say I don't quite have that piece, 100% figured out. But yeah, that's kind of my timeline as I try to do an initiative every quarter.
Yeah, it's certainly great for a team to have that kind of structure or cadence. It's amazing how some teams that are improvement teams, they know exactly what they want to improve, but they don't have an organized cadence and approach to what sequence they're going to go in, what priorities they have, how much time it's going to take. What are the pieces of the change process like validation that you can't skimp on and you got to bake that into the timelines. So that structure is very important for any sort of improvement team. Definitely this kind as well. And that makes me think too is I'm guessing that you're seeing that through this data review, through validation, that you're seeing certain things improve and that you have some progress and some wins and that it's been worth it. Yeah. So what kind of things are you celebrating that you're noticing are better?
Yes, I'm very excited to say that in February and March, we had some serious upward trend. In February, we met our goal. In March, just showed up just shy, but much higher than we have been. It's difficult to explain that to the employees on the service excellence team. So we did this giant presentation, the biggest one we've done. We did a team talk, is what MyMichigan-Sault calls it, but we got up on a stage and we taught service recovery, or MyMichigan calls it trust recovery. We talked to 1,000 employees over 4 different sessions. That was almost exactly 9 months ago. And so when we hit these upward trends in our numbers, I said, you guys, I think this is our team talk coming alive. Like it takes several quarters for employees to say, oh yeah, like that's what they were talking about. And it's hard. That's the survey surfing part. I think that's very difficult is it takes a lot of time. But it's so nice when your numbers finally, go up and stay up. So I'm hoping we can keep that upward trend. So, we'll keep watching it. But yes, I'm excited to say that our overall patient satisfaction is definitely climbing. Mm-hmm. So yes, I think there's a point though, and this is part of the survey surfing too, is that we have to celebrate every win. And that can be really challenging when you're a leader and you are busy in your whirlwind. This could be your employees having a conversation that's maybe difficult for them to have. They would have never had before, but they decided to handle it, on their own. That's something to say, you guys, awesome. Like, awesome. You guys feel confident having those hard conversations without me. That's great. It's just hard when you're a leader because maybe you don't always hear about those wins, but when you see them, make sure you celebrate them because that is how we get these initiatives to stay hardwired. And for our patients to feel that we're putting in that work to change our culture is just leaders celebrating those wins. And I know it's hard, but for me, it's a bucket filler, to see your teams grow and you're like, oh, they're finally listening to me after all these months. But, that's what fills my bucket as a leader is finally seeing them get it, when it clicks and you're like, oh my gosh, my team is getting it.
Yeah.
But you got to look for it.
Yeah. It always surprises us in this work. All of our coaching team marvels at this is that celebration of the wins and the progress, the recognition of it and the celebration and the pause to just really take that in and realize, connect the dots of, oh, this is connected to this, this, and this. It worked. And we should keep doing that. Or we should do things like that again, as that seems to be one of the hardest behaviors to bake into a culture. And it's the positive, it's not like it's a bad thing. There's nothing, it's actually a fun, amazing, positive thing, but it's one of those things that really is hard for organizations to embrace consistently, is to celebrate the progress and the wins along the way.
Yeah.
I think we overthink it.
It is hard.
Yes,
maybe. Yeah. Like you don't even have a pizza party every time that your staff is nice to each other. But you definitely could point it out to them, right? Like employees are looking for you to notice that they're making difficult changes. So even just saying like, great job. I saw that you did that. Great job. I'm noticing. I think that makes a big difference.
People want to be noticed. They want to be seen. They want to be acknowledged. And definitely when they're doing it right and well and getting positive, outcomes on the other side of it. It's we all need that little bit of positive reinforcement and appreciation shown. Well, I told you that 30 minutes would go by fast, and it does. And, when we were talking about doing this podcast, we both admitted we could talk about teams like this and the work they're doing for hours on end. But as we wrap up, was there anything in particular that you wanted to make sure that you got out there in the world in this episode, either to leaders or teams and organizations that are doing things like this to improve the patient experience?
Yeah. When my administration brought to me that they wanted me to lead the service excellence team, it felt like extra work at first. But I have been able to meet employees in departments that aren't mine and that don't necessarily work with mine, and have these really transparent, honest conversations about how they impact our patients. That has been, I think, the best part of my nursing journey so far. Those conversations I've had to tell a housekeeper or a dietary staff when I'm going to their huddles to say, listen, you guys, you really impact the experience our patients have. And they go, no, we don't. No way. Yeah, you do. Yes, you do. And then to see those numbers trend upward and for me to be able to follow up with them and say, look this is the patient saying, I appreciate that you kept my room so clean. It's just amazing to see that transformation. Like I said, this is a real bucket filler for me, this part of my job description. I wouldn't trade it for the world. It is time consuming, but it is time well spent. So I would encourage any leader that's been asked by your admin team to run this team to give it a shot and to really dig in and get to know these employees that walk our hallways, because it has been a real bucket filler for me. So say yes. You're going to want to say no because it's extra work, but say yes. Say yes, because it has been great. And I have learned so much, Sue, from Capstone, you guys' meetings that you have on my lunch break that I get to join every month, your book. I have really learned a lot about the kind of leader I want to be and how I want to show up. Yeah, I think that's what I would say to end the podcast.
Oh, that's great, Chelsea. I'm so glad you were here today. And I know there's some gems that are going to resonate with our listeners out there, because they really do have the heart to serve their communities well. And this is a big part of it. So thanks for leading that effort where you are, Chelsea. And thanks for being here to share.
Yeah, thank you, Sue, for having me. It was fun.
Thanks for tuning in to Culture Change RX. If you found value in today's episode and you are a believer in fostering change in healthcare, join us in making a difference. Follow, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with colleagues and your network. Together, we can make a lasting impact. Until next week, keep inspiring positive change.